Hey, this is Sara Evans, and you're listening to the Neon Eon.
Hey y'all, so glad you have tuned your dial over onto the Neon Eon, your favorite podcast about 90s country-centric music. I'm your host, music journalist Thomas Mooney. As you heard just about 10 seconds ago, Sara Evans is this week's guest. I absolutely loved speaking with Sara earlier this week. We actually spoke just a few days ago, so yeah, a really quick turnaround on this episode. And actually, before we get started, I want to fill y'all in on something that she did that just had me cracking up. So obviously, at the end of these episodes, that is when I asked them to do that little radio liner thing, and of course she nailed it. But I mentioned how on all the notes that I do for these now, I have in like big, giant, all caps font to ask about the radio liner, because that very first episode with Clay Walker, I forgot to ask him about doing it. And so she pauses for a second after I say all that, and she goes, well, I can do one for him if you want. And then she just says like, hi y'all, I'm Clay Walker and you're listening to the Neon Eon. She's laughing through it and everything, but it was really, really funny. I don't know, at least I thought it was funny. So anyway, yeah, back to the subject at hand. It's always going to be an ongoing process of figuring out when and where the Neon Eon portal begins and ends. In general, I've honed in on the years 1986 and 2005 as that window. And of course, a few weeks back, I had Larry Stewart of Rustless Heart on to talk about those early days. And now with Sara, we're focusing on the transition out of the 90s country sound and how it gradually morphed into what we have today. When it comes to Sara's music and her role in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think she's easily one of the most underrated artists. You know, by no stretch can I make it out like she didn't have some major radio success, because she clearly did have these giant anthems that soared to the top. But as she filled me in, and that you'll hear later, it wasn't like this easy walk in the park to get that radio support. I think in many respects you could say that the masses and a growing fan base demanded that airplay. Again though, I think all too often we focus on where a song peaks and just focus on that number. We put a lot of power to that number and a lot of gravity, when we should be talking about the true impact of a song or an album or an artist on a fan base or the sound of that era going forward. And that's really where Sara's strongest impact has come. So I kind of fumble around in my rambling ways when we open up the interview. You'll see that here in a couple of minutes. But it remains true that Sara was one of these leaders in the clubhouse when it came to pairing a lot of the bluegrass and roots instrumentation of like the fiddle and dobro and mandolin with these infectious heartland rock anthems that felt just as great like on a road trip with the windows rolled down as they did with a cup of coffee on a lazy Sunday morning. The point being that there's some versatility there. And she did an incredible job of writing and curating a style and sound that felt like rural county USA. Without a doubt, artists like her, The Chicks, and Martina McBride, they ushered in this organic and rootsiness to country radio in the late 90s that, while it isn't exactly a huge part of modern country radio, it's still very much alive. And if and when there's a disruptor in country music the next 5 years that sees that paradigm shift, I guarantee that you'll see that artist or group of artists point back to this era and this sound. I may be trying to manifest that dream, but I don't care. Let's all speak it into existence. All right, let's do the shameless self-promo part of the program really, really quick. Subscribe to the Neon Eon if you haven't just yet. Give this podcast a 5-star review over on iTunes. Tell all your friends, family, coworkers, the kid who cuts your lawn, the mailman, basically anyone and everyone, especially those who you already know are fans of this era of music. Pitch them with this episode with Sara. It's a real fine place to start. The Neon Eon is on all your favorite social media as well, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can find us at the Neon Eon. While you're at it, check out the Patreon. It's a really, really great way to support this podcast and journalism in general. You'll get some extra content out of it as well. And I keep on saying that we'll have Neon Eon merch on the way, and I promise we do. I just got some mock-ups the other day that I really, really wish I could share with you right now because they are incredibly cool and are the perfect throwback compliments to this podcast, really. And I promise we're getting super close to getting everything set. I'll definitely be getting the usual items like koozies and t-shirts and caps, but I'm also brainstorming about some very 90s specific items that you may enjoy. And of course, you can check out my Americana-based podcast, New Slang, as well. Episodes with folks like Culture Wall, Charlie Crockett, Jamie Wyatt, and Kelsey Walden. They're all over there. And links to everything that I've mentioned, they'll be in the show notes, so check them out if you so wish. Hopefully you do. All right, let's do it. Here is Sara Evans. I guess where I want to start off today is I think that for starters, back in the 90s, one of the things that I really loved, especially in the late 90s that happened, was whenever around this era in the late 90s where the country pop sensibilities blended with a lot of like the traditional like fiddle and mandolin and dobro, and artists like you and like the Dixie Chicks and like Martina McBride, they all kind of like had this space where it felt like you guys were doing some really, really cool things sonically, as far as keeping a lot of those more, I guess, like folk kind of traditions as far as the instrumentation, but adding a little bit of pop flair and obviously keeping a country sensibility to everything. When you go back to that place, like, is it something that you even realized what was going on, or is it just, does that take hindsight?
It's a little bit of both. So I started off with my album, Three Chords and the Truth. That was my debut record. I co-wrote every song on that album, except one. Went out to LA and had Pete Anderson produce, who was Dwight Yoakam's producer and guitar player. And we kind of made this sort of hillbilly record. You know, I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I started out singing bluegrass, and then, you know, singing in bars by the time I was 6 or 7 years old and covering every country song. So my range of, you know, understanding like true country music was really broad and really wide because of the music that my parents introduced me to when I was so little. But Three Chords and the Truth, you know, didn't get much radio airplay at all, but it got a ton of, you know, great like press, and everybody was talking about it. But this consensus from country radio was that it was too country, which I found to be just ridiculous. But country radio is always looking for an excuse not to play you, you know, so they can strong arm the record label as much as possible. And then I decided, you know, well, we need to center up a little bit, do something a little bit more radio friendly and not quite so, you know, kind of female Dwight Yoakam-y. And that's when I came out with No Place That Far. And that was my first #1 record. But I wasn't really totally happy with that sound because I felt like I was kind of giving in a little bit too much to what radio wanted instead of being true to who I was. So around the time that No Place That Far went #1, I found out that I was pregnant with my son Avery. And so during the latter part of the pregnancy, when I was at home, I was just laying on the couch drinking gallons of sweet iced tea and just laying there like a beached whale. I had a lot of time to reflect, like, okay, who am I musically, and how can I come up with a sound that is, it's funny you mentioned the Dixie Chicks and Martina McBride, because those were two artists that I was really digging at the time. And the common denominator between them and the sound that I ultimately came up with was Paul Worley as producer. And also Marcus Hummon as songwriter. So when I was, you know, waiting to deliver Avery, I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to come back? What am I going to be? And how am I going to really, really compete and figure out this radio game? So my first thought was to ask Paul Worley to produce my next album and to co-write with Marcus Hummon. because, as you mentioned, those were such incredible sounds that were happening with the Dixie Chicks. And a lot of that is because of Marcus, like Ready to Run, Cowboy Take Me Away. Marcus is incredible at combining that like bluegrass meets Celtic meets, funk and jazz, and he's just a crazy writer. And it's actually difficult to write songs with him because he's all over the place. And, he'll start singing this melody, and I usually write more of the lyrics. And Marcus will start in with this melody, and I'm trying to write a lyric to what he's singing, and then he'll change the melody, so you have to like really rein him in and be like, okay, settle on a melody so that I can write lyrics to this melody. And it's so much fun. It's such an adventure every time you write with him. So I asked Paul Worley to come out to my house for dinner, and I'd already had the baby. I was getting back into shape. I grew my hair long, and I'm like, I'm going to be somewhere between Martina and the Dixie Chicks and Faith Hill, where I want, I want to be known first and foremost for my music, but I also wanted so badly to become like this sex symbol in country music and just beat out everybody and everything that was happening at the time. So it started with Paul Worley coming over for dinner. And before that dinner, I had bought the Wallflowers record. What's it called? Something about horses. I can't remember, but it's the one that has like one headlight. What's it called?
Bringing Down the Horse.
Bringing Down the Horse, yeah. I was obsessed with that record, and mostly because of the drummer. And so those were still the days where you would buy CDs and have the liner notes. And so I looked to see who was drumming, and it was a guy named Matt Chamberlain. And so when Paul came to dinner, I said, I want you to do one thing for me, and it might be tough, but I want you to find this drummer. His name is Matt Chamberlain. And I had also done some research on him and found out the other records that he had played on, like the Edie Brickell record that was so famous. And that was a really famous drum part as well. And I'm like, this guy's amazing. And I wanted to pull out something different that I knew Martina and the Dixie Chicks didn't utilize. And so Paul was like, why this guy? There's a million great drummers in Nashville. And I said, because he's incredible, and you'll see. Trust me. So after that, I wrote with Marcus Hummon and Daryl Scott. They came to my house also. We had never met, and we just started talking about my life growing up on a farm in Missouri. And that's how Marcus is. He's so crazy and funny, but he just started singing kind of the story that I was saying. And that's how he started, like, I've been telling my dreams to the scarecrow. And then he was like, wait, did you have a scarecrow? And I was like, no, we never had a scarecrow, but it was painting the perfect picture, of this Midwest farm and a little girl, who has really no one to talk to but the scarecrow about her dreams. And then it sort of became this take on Wizard of Oz, like I love my home. I love my parents. I love my upbringing, but I'm also in dire need of leaving and pursuing my dream, and my dream that my parents really created for me in the first place. So it was kind of something that I didn't even have a choice in. And so we wrote Born to Fly, and then Paul Worley said, we found Matt Chamberlain. We located him. He lives in Seattle. He's a great guy, and he's more than happy to come to Nashville to play on the record. And knowing that we had found Matt Chamberlain, that's when I decided to change the rhythm of Born to Fly. So we initially wrote Born to Fly like a bluegrass song with a train beat. And I was like, this song is so incredible lyrically, but I'm afraid it's going to get passed over if we record it as a bluegrass sounding song. So that's why when I decided to make it have that funk kind of beat, like Two Princes is the song that I thought of when I was thinking of that. and it sounds like that. So when Matt came in, he had never been to Nashville before. He had never played on a country record. He didn't know the Nashville number system. He just kind of made this weird chart for all the songs, and it was all these like just weird like chicken scratch, but only he knew what it meant, and he was charting out the songs for himself, and it was just absolutely incredible. And then he played on every record of mine after that, and so many other artists too. And so you're exactly right when you talk about that, sounds from bluegrass, like dobros and mandolins and fiddles combined with the funk that Matt Chamberlain brought, and then of course Glenn Worf on bass. So the two of them together, it was magical.
Yeah. Like, I think like that's such a rich, obvious, time in 90s country is all of that bluegrass tinged music. But, also like there's this interesting thing that you're doing as far as like the lyrics, as you were talking about growing up in Missouri. It's almost like the country equivalent of like heartland rock. There's a very like even like John Mellencamp-y kind of way as far as like the scarecrows and the
Absolutely
cornrows, and obviously like the most of the country is flyover country, and I think that like that's what's resonated so much with not only country artists, but obviously at this time too, country music has just gone mainstream, if you will.
country music today.
What I mean, like back then, as far as like having the introduction of the CD, like people just started listening to country music regardless if like their parents listened to country music.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it was a wonderful time for the genre. It really was, like late 90s, early 2000s, because you're right. It just seems like middle America, everywhere but Los Angeles and New York City, but everywhere else, people primarily did just have it on a country radio station at all times. But the late 90s and early 2000s ushered in this new sound that a lot of younger generation could really get on board with. So then country genre was not any longer just your parents' music. And it was, it became really cool, and a lot of crossover happened as well. Like with, Could Not Ask for More or Faith Hill, all of Faith Hill songs, And then I think when the Taylor Swift thing happened, I think that sort of zigzagged country a little bit and maybe caused us to lose our identity somewhat, because she brought in this group of really young girls, and then she sort of took them with her when she went to pop. And so country and Nashville and the Nashville labels did what they always do, and they tried to follow some sort of trend that kind of got us to where country music is now, which is bro country, and it's very dumbed down and not something that I'm a fan of.
Yeah, no doubt. Like one of my favorite aspects of this era too is that all of y'all kind of had distinct voices. And I mean, obviously we just talked about like the sonic textures and stuff like that, and you guys kind of all shared that, but you guys all sounded differently. And that's like something
Absolutely.
that like you don't really think about. That's like one of those things that probably like lower on the list as far as like the differences between now and then as far as country music goes. But you go back and listen, all of y'all had different distinct kind of vocal ranges and
songs and song subjects. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like you had like Cowboy Take Me Away, and then you had Breathe by Faith Hill, and then you had Baby I Love You by Martina, and then you had Born to Fly by me. And the music was all very different. Even though Paul was producing at least three of us big acts, we all did sound very distinct. And you're right, you could totally tell, like immediately that's Sara Evans, immediately that's Martina McBride, immediately that's Jody Messina. And now I can't tell the difference in anybody. And of course I'm not interested in in bro country or mainstream country radio now, so I don't pay attention to who's who. But even if I tried to, especially if I tried to by their music and their voices, there's no way. They all sound exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of these little, I guess, running themes that I've noticed on this podcast with talking with people is how modern country, it's almost like a homogenous voice. You can't really tell where anyone's from other than generic Southern. But back in the 80s and 90s and all the way up into the 2000s, you could really tell like where different pockets of America were as far as accents go, or maybe some of the storytelling. As you mentioned, like you're from Missouri, and there's definitely like that heartland rock feel, but like Dixie Chicks, a little bit more of that Texas flair. And I think that was essential to the decade, to the era as well, is knowing these little pockets. How important for you was it that you kind of took that where you're from and bring it to the mainstream, bring it to Nashville?
That's an interesting question. And I don't think I was thinking about that, but now that you bring it up, I can totally hear that and hear what you're talking about. I don't think I ever consciously thought I'm bringing Missouri to country radio, but there is a distinct sound, and it is like John Cougar and even, Bruce Springsteen, or, people like that are from the Midwest. I do now, looking back, think about a lot of my songs like I Keep Looking and Perfect. And they do bring this like middle America kind of vibe and blue collar or farming vibe. But I don't think that I ever really thought about, bringing my home state out to the world. I think it was just instinctively there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's like such a refreshing part of that moment of that era. And, something else that like I think maybe you can elaborate on or agree with or disagree with is that a lot of times artists, they had a little bit of a more of a developed sound as far as when they got to Nashville. And as far as like, if you look at somebody, you mentioned Dwight Yoakam a minute ago, or like a Marty Stewart, wherever they're from, like it's almost like they developed wherever they were from and then moved to Nashville, versus I've heard a lot of people on here comment about how moving to Nashville with a blank slate and kind of like not necessarily knowing who you were going to be.
You're so right about that. I mean, that's my biggest complaint about country music right now, and music in general. I mean, even pop music has just really sucked, in my opinion, over the last few years as far as what they're choosing to play on the radio. But you're exactly right about that. And I feel very blessed and lucky to have grown up on stage. Like, my parents put me on stage with my brothers at 4 years old, and I spent my entire childhood developing my craft and my art, and not even knowing that I was doing it. I just thought, I'm a singer, I'm going to move to Nashville and get a record deal. There was just no question in my mind, because I knew that this is what I was born to do, and I'm so experienced. So I'm really, really good at what I do already in my early 20s. And you're exactly right. People now move to Nashville as blank slates, and they allow the labels and the producers. And, these producers nowadays, they're doing real musicians. They have, a lot of them tend to have like a big ego and, real like control issues. And in terms of telling the artist, what they're going to sound like, and co-writing every song with the artist, and then, the label taking a percentage of every single thing that the artist does. And so that is perpetuating these people not being individuals and not having an individual distinct sound, because they're like, if I don't follow the norm, it's kind of the way our whole freaking world is right now. Like, if I don't follow what everyone says that I'm supposed to do, then I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to be canceled, or I'll be, ousted from the community. And it saddens me because Nashville has changed a lot. Nashville used to be its own place with its own mind. And now, so many people have moved to Nashville from LA, from New York, from Atlanta, and they've sort of taken over what Music Row once was. And now it's just a factory. And country music has gone to the farthest spectrum to now where it's sort of like rap and hip hop, where you can't really tell, who's who, because there are just so many artists that are just being put out all the time. And they might have one or two singles and then another one's there to take their place, where we used to establish artists and then, let them have this relationship with country radio that lasted a long time.
Yeah. Well, going back to like how you mentioned, your first record, 3 Chords and the Truth, how it did not have a lot of radio play, but it was critically acclaimed. And if you go back now, and people still talk about that record as far as it being a great record. Like if that was not 97 and it was 2017, you like, obviously I bet you feel like you wouldn't have had a chance to do another record.
Oh, totally. I mean, I've been so blessed, and I had such a great relationship with RCA Records and Joe Galante, who signed me to a 7-album deal. So it was awesome because the pressure was off. I mean, was I upset that 3 Chords didn't get more airplay? Of course. I mean, that began my hatred of country radio and country radio programmers, when there was absolutely no reason for them not to play 3 Chords and the Truth. That was the epitome of the perfect country song. And here I am, this young, female artist that Joe Galante just gave the biggest record deal to, that had been given to a new artist in years. And that's just country radio wanting to have power. And it really has very little to do with whether or not they like the music. I mean, they loved 3 Chords and the Truth, but for whatever reason, they were strong-arming RCA Records in order to get something else. So they won't play Sara Evans because RCA Records won't give them Martina McBride for their free concert. So that's all it is. It's just control. There was really no reason for them not to play it other than control, and that we were going to have to do a lot more for them. So they're not going to give anything to anybody for free. And if you knew like the work that I had to do prior to No Place That Far becoming a number 1 record, you would die. I mean, it was just, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have to work hard for our careers, but it's just silliness that it is not about the music. It's just about how long the radio programmers can strong arm a label until the label finally says, enough is enough. You need to play the Sara Evans record.
A lot of people bring up the Telecommunications Act of 96 because that's when corporations start building or buying up radio stations, and there's not any kind of small mom and pop aspect to radio or to even though these labels are big, there's no aspect to that to labels, to any of the business side of Nashville.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And especially radio. I mean, I have seen and heard about, a lot of these like smaller record labels starting, because now, you don't really need the big label deal as much anymore. And even I have my own label now called Born to Fly Records, where we're producing and releasing albums on that label. But it's more the radio aspect of it. I think that, the fact that one or two or three people control all the radio stations in America, and ultimately television too. We see that in the news, where you see like every single news channel saying the same exact things, the same quotes, the same like thought of the day. And it just takes out all the creativity and the individual mind saying, no, this is what I want to say about this news story, or this is what I want to hear on my radio station because I personally love the Dixie Chicks. And so that's who I'm going to play. And it's not that at all. I mean, people and the average person out there really does think that that's how it happens. Like in the movie Coal Miner's Daughter, when, it used to be about what a DJ liked. And if you could get a DJ to like your record and spin your record, then you could get this momentum going throughout the country. But now you have one or two people that are programming all the stations, and it's taken out all the individual aspect of the human being that moves to Nashville and this is my sound. And there are a few others like that they have a different way of singing that's not the same as all the bro country. And even like Luke Bryan is really the one that started with Country Girl Shake It For Me. Mm-hmm. And his sound was individual, and that was great, and that was cool, and that was a funny song and a fun song. But the problem is everybody signed all these guys that tried to sound just like Luke Bryan and just like that song. And I just don't get it when there are so many unique sounding singers out there that we should be promoting and celebrating instead of just the same sound.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that it's basically like you take like the Luke Bryan template and then just make a copy of it. And then like, you're not even actually using the original copy. You're always like, how like a copy will degrade after you've copied like the 50th copy of it. It's like that where it doesn't even, it's just the watered down aspect of it.
So watered down. And I just can't stand it. I mean, and then what is even more disheartening and more disappointing is when you have artists that are really cool and really unique, like Keith Urban or Jason Aldean. Like I love Jason Aldean's first record with Amarillo Sky and that song Why. Just incredible country music. And so it's so disheartening when you hear somebody who originally came out with that original sound. Now they're trying to copy the bro country and sing songs about drinking, just to get on the radio. And, like I've heard Keith Urban do that a little bit. He's trying to keep his foot in the door by remain on country radio by doing that, but still trying to be Keith Urban. And I just wish that everybody could be individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that often happens when an artist finally gets signed, puts out a record, obviously you start going on tour, and I guess like back in the 90s, like you guys were always consistently on tour. Mm-hmm. And what happens is a lot of people comment about how they have like less time to write. They have less time to do all of because there's all that aspect. There's like all these other obligations to being Sara Evans all of a sudden. What did you do to make sure that you were able to still write, but like also like have those inspirations and find those little pockets of those details, those ideas, and made sure like you were able to capture them for when you were able to write?
My outlook on that and my personality has always been to be very competitive with myself. And so I never worried about that. Like, you know, oh, Born to Fly was such a hit. The whole record was such a success, and it took me to the next level. So I really want to try to do that again. I've never thought that. After Born to Fly, I was like, that's Born to Fly, and now it's time for me to make even better music and a more sophisticated record. So then I made Restless. My strategy has always been to never repeat anything I've done on purpose. Now, I'm going to repeat it sometimes unknowingly just because that's how I sing and that's where my melodies tend to go and where my lyrics tend to go, but never with the goal in mind of I'm going to make another Born to Fly because that was so successful. I've always wanted every album to be its own thing. And according to where I am in my life at that time and what I'm listening to and what inspires me. So I would always just, you know, say, okay, I'm going to write the new record now and I'm going to search for songs. And when I went in the studio, I would always try to sing better than the last record and challenge myself more and do things, you know, musically different, but still remaining true to who I am. So I think there's a solid Sara Evans sound that's out there, but you're not going to get bored with my records. You know, none of my other records sound like Born to Fly, and none of my other records sound like Restless. And like after I had Suds in the Bucket, every publisher in town started sending me songs like that, like real like country, same, you know, similar vibe about, you know, losing a daughter, just whatever. And I would get so frustrated because I was like, I've already done Suds in the Bucket. I have no desire to repeat that because I want something new. And that's what art should be, is constantly creating something new with your imagination.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can kind of get typecast as a certain kind of, you do these songs and that's all you do.
Right. And that's why I was so excited to do Copy That, because I've never done a full covers record before. And I wanted to do songs that A, would surprise people, and B, would re-impress people. Like, wow. I mean, I knew that she could sing this, but I didn't know she could sing My Sharona or Come On Eileen, or I just always want to up the ante and kind of outdo the last project that I did.
Yeah, and I think, like, especially when it comes to a record like that, where it is covers, people know songs like that, you have to be almost like extra creative because you have to bring something else to the table that is your own spin on something.
Yeah, that's why I love singing songs that were originally done by men, because, you know, it's there's no way it can't be a new take. And so Come On Eileen and My Sharona and Crazy Love and Monday Morning by Fleetwood Mac. I mean, I did all these covers of men songs, and, you know, and I even did a Wallflower song to honor Matt Chamberlain. But yeah, I always want to show people other sides to what I can do, because we should never stop. Like Lionel Richie, he's probably one of my idols in the sense that he vocally never ages. Like he's just always great, no matter what.
Yeah, it's there's obviously guys like, you wonder, like, what are they doing as far, are they drinking a certain tea or something to just keep those vocal cords pristine?
No, I think it's genetic. I think that you're either an incredible athlete, which is essentially what a singer is, or you're not. You're okay, but some of us can sing great for years, and our vocal cord, I mean, I just had my vocal cords checked last year, and he said they're pearly white, you have the vocal cords of a 20-year-old, you're a professional athlete. And that's the way you have to look at it. But some people, you know, will never be able to serve as good as Serena Williams. And some can sing fabulously for their entire lives, like Dolly Parton, and never age, never slow down. And that is definitely the category in which I wish to place myself.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, what do you think about as far as thinking? You've already mentioned Dolly. You've mentioned coal miner's daughter, Loretta. Like those kind of singers back then always had, again, distinct voices as far as how they wrote, what kind of image they had, and I think that like definitely transcended into this era where I would say like one of the big things, if you look at all the songs from the 90s, one distinct feature is that a lot of these songs are about adult situations and about kind of like doing adult things as far as hard decisions and stuff like that. Is that something that you ever realized, or is it now just because in comparison to what's going on now that do you see what I'm talking about as far as there being, I guess, maybe a little bit more of an adult in the room in country music back then?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, in country music used to be so celebrated for the writers and the song topics, like you're talking about. Like they're very adult topics, and they talk about, you know, like that Reba McEntire song. I mean, so many of Reba's songs, but like whoever's in New England, when whoever's in New England's through with you, or one of her songs that her husband says, "Have you ever cheated on me?" And she said, "Only in my mind." And just all these, like the George Jones, you know, "He Stopped Loving Her Today." I mean, those are incredibly deep and sad and serious adult songs. And yeah, I mean, this is what I see in Nashville today. Like people just move here, and there are a lot of people that can sing. I mean, so many people in this world that can sing, but are they true artists? You know, like a lot of us could probably paint a cool picture on a canvas, but are we truly gifted? And, you know, my family, we make fun of these singers that we call like circle singers, where, you know, it's like, it's cursive. Sorry, circle. My daughters are in the car with me, so they're going to like correct everything that I say wrong. Cursive singers. And who's a good example of who kind of started it? Like Billie Eilish, you know, that kind of singing, where it even kind of Lorde, you know, that girl who sings the song Royal. Yeah. Like I, you know, and they just all like do that weird sound. So I mean, there's a lot of people that can sing and that can make a record, but we're not seeing those artists that just change the world. Like Loretta Lynn changed the world. Patsy Cline changed the world. Dolly Parton definitely changed the world. I've always wanted to be an artist like that. I don't want just hits, hit after hit after hit. I want to change someone's life with my music. And you're not going to do that when you're just putting out all these cookie cutter, like someone who's pretty, who can sing. And then you fix them up in the studio and you Photoshop their pictures and you send them out. And I just hate it, because I liked, you know, the weird album covers of like Merle Haggard standing there with a cigarette in his mouth. And like, there's nobody else like Merle Haggard anywhere. And Nashville used to be awesome at finding those artists. But Nashville also was a magnet to people who knew that they were individual and didn't want to go to LA and didn't want to go to New York because they're from middle America, they're country, and they have, like you said, adult things to sing about. And so I really wish that we could, get back to that. Now it's more like you don't find any of that kind of music except like on Americana stations and outlets.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've always appreciated about your records too is that, yeah, there were those radio hits, those number one songs, but you had a lot of deep cuts too, as far as like songs that just obviously were never played on the radio, but just made the bottom of the record strong. And one of those early of course, you're welcome. But one of those songs that I've always loved is New Hometown. I feel like that
oh my
could
gosh,
have been
thank you.
Well, what's kind of the story behind that song?
Well, I co-wrote that with my brother, Matt Evans, and we were just talking about, and let me tell you who else we wrote that with. She was the third member of Sugarland, but I can't think of her name right now. But the three of us were just talking about, missing the small town vibe and looking for a way to find that in around the areas in Nashville. But there's nothing sort of that replaces coming from a small town. And, the song is just about getting caught up in the busyness of life and the craziness of life. And, when at the time when we wrote that, we had no idea. Like, I remember when, the most controversial thing that I was involved in was like a Alabama Auburn, rivalry that someone thought there was a bad call. I mean, we had no idea what the world was about to become and how divided we would become. But that song is really about that. Like, I just want to find a new hometown that's sort of heaven-like and pristine and get away from the city, get away from the stress, and wake up in a new hometown and start all over.
Yeah, like I always felt like that song could have been on radio as well. So,
yeah, I mean, you just have no idea how hard it is to. I have so many songs. I mean, there's a song on Restless called Tonight that we did release as a single, and radio wouldn't play it. And like Backseat of a Greyhound Bus, I mean, that song stalled like at number 12 on the charts, and I thought that should have been such a huge hit. And what an amazing story written by Hillary Lindsey. But it's just very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Hillary Lindsey, and you mentioned Americana just a second ago, I looked it up, and I believe that you were the second person. I believe Faith Hill ended up having a song by who I'm about to mention like the year before, but you cut Bible Song by Lori McKenna, who is by far like probably like the best songwriter happening right now in Nashville. Obviously that was
incredible
early on in as far as like one of those early cuts for her that you did. First off, like how did you come across that song? And then two, decide that you needed to cut it?
That song was pitched to me, and yeah, it was after Lori had the Faith Hill cut, so she was kind of the big deal, and everybody was talking about her. She never moved to Nashville. I think she's from Maine or somewhere way up in the Northeast, and so she was kind of an anomaly. She was sending songs, and that were just so different and so unlike anything else that was in Nashville coming from any of the writers at the time. And Bible Song just hit me because, I grew up in a small town, and I understand also the transition. It sounds like I'm so negative. I'm really a positive person, but these are just true facts. But the transitioning of the small town, from being these idealistic places to raise your kids, and everybody knows everybody, and it's picture perfect, and life is simple. The transition from a lot of these small towns in middle America, going from that to being like meth and heroin, capitals of the world, and that really taking over a lot of these small towns, especially, when the economy goes south and people become kind of desperate and poor, and it's not easy to be rich in a small town. Oh my God, that's a great song title. That's the song I'm going to write next. It's not easy to be rich in a small town. It's not. There's not a lot of opportunity to make money in a small town. So to me, that's what Bible Song was. I'm like, oh my gosh, what an amazing song about drug overdose, and how this person just felt the need to run from that town because she didn't want to be buried. And I got a lot of criticism for that song too, because a lot of Christians were saying that I was speaking against the Bible, or like against the church, like, so no one would sing a Bible song over me. And that's not at all what that song means. It's about, so no one would sing a hymn over my grave at too young of an age. Like, I want to get out of here so I also don't die from a drug overdose. I just thought it was just a tremendously well-written song. Not just the lyrics, but the melody too. I mean, I pretty much covered her demo, exactly the way she did it, except for that I like to stretch my songs out to like 10 minutes long.
Yeah. I love how, like, right when you said that, your next song, like your voice like brightened up right there. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really a lot of times when you tell a songwriter, oh, there's a song in there, they kind of roll their eyes, but like that's like a legit one right there. I'm right there.
That's
with you.
legit.
So.
Mark my words, I'm gonna write that. I promise. I'm not guaranteeing it'll make the next record, but I'm gonna write that song. It's hard to be rich in a small town.
Yeah.
Because there could be a lot of different meanings behind that, and that's what's so fun, about music, and that's what's so frustrating about country music currently, because we should be hearing every topic on the radio. We should be hearing everything like we used to. Like, we would go from He Stopped Loving Her Today to I've Got Friends in Low Places to Cowboy Take Me Away to I Could Not Ask for More. And that's the way it should be. But now it's just so, oh my God. I mean, every song sounds the same. And even the ones that are trying to sound different have to walk that fine line of, I got to do a beer song and a truck song, even though I don't have a Southern accent, but I got to do it because that's what they want. They want it to be so small that they never, ever take the chance on playing something new and then have that listener turn the channel, and then they lose advertising dollars.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that, because, there's where people are just, I mean, I don't know. I can understand like wanting to obviously sign a record deal and like wanting to be famous and on the radio, and, especially early on, there's probably a lot of concessions that you feel that you are obligated to make just because you don't have the experience, or you don't have, maybe like you tell yourself that once I'm a little bit more established, I will do more of what I want to do. And,
right.
that's sometimes like never going to happen.
And I was so fortunate because I never had to feel that way with Joe Galante and RCA. He always let me call the shots musically. I mean, every now and then, like one of the only arguments that Joe and I ever had was that he hated Suds in the Bucket. And I love to remind him of this every time I see him. And he's probably like, God, would you stop talking about that in interviews? I'm sorry. I was wrong. But he was dead wrong about Suds in the Bucket. He hated it. He just, didn't want it on the record, and then finally agreed to let me put it on the record. And that's really been the only time that he was kind of on me and so opinionated about my music. Otherwise, he sort of just let me do my thing, and then I handed him the record. Here it is. But there was something about Suds in the Bucket that he didn't like, and I just knew that it was a hit, and I put my foot down and I acted like a diva, and I just said, I'm not listening to you. This is going on the record, or I quit, that kind of deal. And then it turned out to be one of my biggest hits of all time. But I lost my train of thought, or what you had said. But, oh, yeah, it is very true, though. I mean, a lot of artists do have to start out. Well, for instance, my daughter, Olivia, she's launching her career right now. She just finished making an EP, and, we're going to be launching her this summer. And she co-wrote every song. The music is incredible. She's totally pop, not country. The music's incredible. Her voice is incredible. It's very sophisticated. She's only 18. But there is one song that is really commercial. And we all agree and understand that needs to be her first single because it's the most commercial. And you have to kind of come out with something like that first in order to then, be able to be like Taylor Swift and make an album like 1989 or Folklore. And that comes later, but when you're first starting out, yeah, you have to really appeal to the broadest audience that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously Suds in the Bucket you just went off on, but like, what was it what was it like the first thing that made you think like, oh, this is something I need to do? Like what was like that first little thing that drew you to it?
I think it was God, honestly. I mean, because I really believe that the Holy Spirit nudges and guides us. And before I make a record, I'm always praying that God gives me inspiration for a great song to write, or, I'll always pray like that when I'm going to go into meetings with the publishers, that they pull the right songs to pitch to me. Like, why did the publisher pull Slow Me Down to pitch to me? And that song was not even really that new. He was just like, yeah, I was going through our old catalog, and this one's about 5 years old, but I thought I would bring it to see what you thought of it. Well, that was such a blessing because it's such a great song, and I was able to have a hit record with it. But so I do believe that was just God, because I don't know that on another day I would have thought and felt so strongly about Suds in the Bucket. And especially given the demo that was sent to me. The demo was absolutely terrible. It wasn't done in a train beat. It was like a slow swing, like a two-step. So it was like, she was in the backyard, say it was a little past 9. And that's how the demo singer sang. And I understand why Joe Galante was like, what? What are you thinking? I just knew that was a lyric that would resonate with so many people, and it was funny. I didn't have another song like that. I'd never released a song like that before. And I was thinking about Alan Jackson in Chattahoochee, and I was like, if we speed it up like that and we make it sort of like that vibe, this is a hit. And my brother was the only one that agreed with me at the time. Like, everybody looked at me like I was insane. But then once we tracked it, like the whole band in the studio, everybody was like, that's a smash.
Yeah, that's really so interesting that you could see that in that, that version, even if it was totally different and no one else could really envision it. Y'all just had like, I guess like you could just see like the bones of it working well. And if
Yeah,
you just had your
absolutely.
imprint enough, you could do it.
Yeah, because I grew up singing bluegrass and really ultra country stuff. And so partly that was in my sweet spot of singing. There's only a few other female country artists that can really sing that way, like Patti Loveless and Natalie from the Dixie Chicks. And I've got that same kind of voice that's just really like, just very pure and really just cuts through like a laser. So when I sing a really country song like that, like, I don't know if you've heard it. I think it's from Slow Me Down, but there's a song called Better Off on there. And then, or kind of like the song Cheatin'. That's my wheelhouse. And so I just knew that I could take Suds in the Bucket and make it into that. And I could sound so different from any other female, because not a lot of females sing that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for taking some time.
Yeah, thank you. This was so fun. I can't wait to hear it.
All right, that is it for today's episode. Huge thanks to Sara for taking some time to talk about the 90s and her career in general. Next week, we are joined by another huge star of the era. Again, subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, I'll see y'all next week here at the Neon Eon.